The Academy of Nine Dialects pretended it didn't have a basement. You could study 3 galaxies of law upstairs without learning that below the language labs, the air smelled faintly of argon and unreasonable promises. Lysa Arantes, a scholarship human whom the filing system insisted on calling linguistics minor, had learned to read the way a building hides rooms. She followed the kinds of signs facilities leaves for its self-maintenance glyphs tucked under proper calligraphy, floor plates with the wrong squeak, ducks that hummed in frequencies buildings use for secrets, and found the vault on a Thursday afternoon. Because important doors are always most honest when nobody feels dramatic. The door was older than several departments combined, a slab of alloy that had taught hammers humility. Its face was covered in a script the Academy called Sanctum, a ceremonial overlay for access control that made denial sound like liturgy. Lisa set down her bag the way mechanics lay out wrenches when the leak is greater than the homeowner said. The observation gallery above held 3 scholars already arranging their faces into reverence. Archivist Marsev, with a posture that made chairs consider their worth. An Azwari mathematician who believed numbers granted citizenship. And Instructor Hallex from Methods, whose job was to tell entropy how the day would go. Student Arantes, Hallex called down, gentle as a warning. The vault opens for no curriculum. It opens by council vote and choral key. He gestured to 6 empty podiums attached to the floor like obligations. Lisa smiled the way people do when agreed constraints are true, but not complete. Understood, she said, which is what you say when you intend to obey the part of the rule deserves. She looked at the slab, then at the seam where the slab pretended not to be 2 things, then at a corner panel that had the decency to be a different alloy repair panel. Maintenance access. The place doctrine puts practicality when it needs to pretend it forgot. I'm not here to open it, she lied, then told a truth that frightened the gallery more. I'm here to log in. Up close, the maintenance panel admitted to having ports that spoke unpoetic dialects. Fiber, diagnostic bus, a legacy admin slot whose spec had not been fashionable in a century. Lisa's tablet lacked the proper reverence. It had a cracked screen, a sticker from a cafe that had given her free coffee during exams, and a set of adapters she called by names like Hope and Felony. The vault flashed polite errors when she presented the Academy's official credentials. Council quorum required. Chorale key misconfigured. Authority insufficient. Please consult your ancestors. She sighed as if registering disappointment with a teacher she wanted to impress and unplugged the livery. She plugged in a cable that had once been part of a mining rig and told the vault in a dialect reserved for hardware that thinks it is holy, I am maintenance. The vault considered being offended and chose to be honest. The runes dimmed from liturgy to interface. The seam breathed light, like a person testing the room's patience. In the gallery, Archivist Marsev leaned forward so quickly his robe forgot its job. What are you doing? He demanded, which is a question asked too late in most interesting stories. Turning off a front end, Lysa said, and tapped a prompt that had been buried under a century of ceremony. Root login enter admin phrase. By the book, Hallex murmured, almost to himself. The Aswari mathematician smiled as if subdermal proof had been located under bad notation. It cannot be that simple, Marsev hissed. It never is, Lysa agreed. She did not type the admin phrase because she did not know it. She typed 3 others, a default string she had learned from repairing food printers in a dorm that did not believe in IT. A salted variant based on the day the Academy was founded. And finally, because buildings learn, the name of the contractor who had installed the panel, gleaned from a corroded tag, and a cultural habit human universities use called paying attention. The vault blinked in a rate that could be called thought. Holography rippled from art to menu. The scene grew a heartbeat. Alarms did not sound because security had not been consulted in the installation, and because the people who had built the vault had trusted ceremony more than curiosity. The gallery learned a new stillness, the kind that classrooms practice when confronted with an answer that requires tenure to survive. Lysa did not step back from the door because stepping back is what people do when fear gets to vote. She kept one palm on the panel to keep the vault believing in the continuity of her existence. Lines of text cascaded in a grammar that began as sacred and ended as C. Even languages want coworkers. State your purpose, a vault whispered through the interface, which is the most dangerous question systems ask. Lysa did not write truth or lies. She wrote audit. Marsev found his voice first because authority hates being surprised by competence. You will stop, he said, and Lysa believed him. She would later, after the necessary line had been crossed. Halix's smile held both resignation and tuition. Archivist, she is not stealing. She is returning documentation to a door. The Aswari muttered something about conserved information and divine jokes. Lisa kept typing. You are leaking history. Your guardians have mistaken corral for secure. Show me the changelog. The vault showed her what bureaucracy hides from itself. Not treasure, not weapons, but edits. Councils revising which books counted as canonical histories. Committees soft deleting catastrophes on days when catastrophes were unfashionable. Treaties tucked into footnotes, and then exiled to storage racks labeled pending contextualization. The Coral Key had been introduced precisely when the Academy began to worry that its past was inconvenient. The admin menu had been left for, or call in case the choir was late. Lysa's mouth went dry in a way coffee cannot fix. They versioned truth, she said, and did not expect anyone to be surprised. Close it, Marsev said, panic learning volume. You do not understand the diplomatic consequences. Lysa did understand. Donors, reputations, chairs endowed by the very trees the vault now held receipts for. She also understood exams, rent, and how buildings teach you which rooms it is time to grow into. She selected the most generous option the interface offered. Read only. Public mirror to the Academy Commons. Delayed by 6 hours to let adults write statements with adjectives. She looked up at Halix. Teacher, she said, consent folded in a request. Halix nodded once. If we are to be a school, let us be taught. A seam widened, and a hinge that had not been asked to move in 112 years remembered its job. Air rolled out smelling like dust that had been gainfully employed. Lisa did not step through. She stayed at the panel, watching the permissions propagate to a network that would now pretend it had always planned to host them. The vault's voice softened away from warning toward relief. Admin acknowledged. It said, governance restored. Next of kin notified. The last line made no sense until the inner hall lights found the first shelf and woke the first recorder. At the end of the aisle, a stone that was not a stone blinked. It had been classified as artifact of unknown function. It said, in a human language far older than Academy policies, hello, child. Lysa, who had come for a login screen and found a syllabus, blinked back. In the gallery, Marsev sat down hard because his knees had learned a lesson pride refused to teach. Halix, quietly, opened the Academy's broadcast system. By the book, he said into the microphone, voice steady. We have work. By morning, the vault's mirror had propagated into the Academy Commons the way honest light finds cracks. Lecture halls that had trained voices to sing choral keys were suddenly full of students reading change logs like they were crime novels, and the maintenance channel, normally reserved for reports, about stubborn doors and dignified leaks filled with screenshots of permissions behaving as if they respected citizens. Lisa Arantes did not go to class. She went back to the basement because some rooms begin to rely on the people who notice them. The monolith scene glowed a patient gold. The admin panel hummed at a frequency that reminded her of her grandmother's sewing machine work being done to make living possible. In the observation gallery, Instructor Halix had traded his robe for a work jacket in a gesture buildings appreciate. Archivist Marsev had not slept and had learned humility by osmosis. 3 new faces studied her like a committee pretending to be a conversation. A public affairs deputy who smelled like statements, a legal counsel whose pen made nervous weather, and a liaison from the council whose badge offered authority the way a handshake offers fingers. Student Arantes, the liaison said, by what authority did you alter vault governance? Lysa kept one hand on the panel, both to keep admin alive and to remind herself that equipment is made of screws, not adjectives. Maintenance, she said. The deputy flinched at the word as if it contained grease. You bypassed sacred protocol, he insisted. We restored the service interface, Halix corrected, gentle as a guardrail. Sacred is what happens after something works for long enough to become a habit. Marsev found the tone he uses when he wants to keep a friend and an institution. The mirror is public, he said, reluctant admiration flickering behind the words like a status indicator. The council will convene at noon. Until then, we request no further expansions. Lysa nodded. A request contains more courage than a command when the room knows it cannot enforce. Read only remains, she said. If you want it closed, bring choral quorum or a better argument. The legal counsel sighed, as if a page had requested to be read. Document your steps, she said to Lysa. If we are to defend you, we require a chain that shamas shortcuts. The vault did not wait for noon to become useful. Systems built by people who believed in librarianship often hide kindness in their boot sequences. A shelf in the first aisle lit without being asked. 6 capsules of translucent composite, each containing an object that any donor would have. Called a relic, and any engineer would have called a part. The labels were mercilessly clear in the UI that had replaced liturgy. Core, capacitor, bus, lens, seal, wire. Beside each label, a date. Beneath each date, 2 entries. Installed, removed. Lisa reached for the panel to scroll and found the interface had another idea. The stone that had spoken yesterday artifact of unknown function until it introduced itself with hello. Child spoke again in English that tasted like basalt and good water. When they took the story apart, they kept the pieces. We kept the receipts. Marsev sat down, because sitting is how you prevent falling when furniture learns to argue. The council liaison tried procedure. What is the provenance of voice? The stone obliged with a tone that passed for patient. I am a recorder stone from before your council named itself after a number. I am a witness carved from a riverbed that had learned to remember. Halleck smiled in the way teachers do when the syllabus gets better by surprise. We have an oral history, he murmured, and a device that refuses to be merely ceremonial. The public mirror brought the campus to a simmer. A cohort of mechanics from facilities arrived uninvited with a trolley of tools, and the smugness of people discovering that their vocabulary had become fashionable. We heard maintenance needed to be in the minutes, said a woman named Scylla, whose belt carried adapters labeled hope and felony the way Lysa's did. She looked at the admin panel with a respectful squint. You shorted the choir by telling the door it was a door. I showed it its ports, Lysa said. Scylla laughed. That's all a good day is. The noon chime found the council in quorum, and the commons already convinced. The council streamed in with robes performing gravitas. Their microphones carefully did not. The chancellor spoke into the broadcast with the rhythm of a person consulted by donors, often enough to balance nouns. By the book, she said, drawing on the Academy's shared spell. We recognize a change to the vault's modes. We do not recognize unilateral authority to rewrite our relationship with history. Halleck spoke before Lysa could choose a polite verb. It was written unilaterally, he said. We have merely removed the italics. Council sessions are where verbs go to see if they can keep their jobs. The chancellor called her first witness, Archivist Marsev, who had the grace to look uncomfortable in front of a camera. Do we risk destabilizing treaties by releasing context? She asked. Marsev did not blink toward her. He looked into the lens, because memory addresses the public, not the podium. We risk destabilizing myth, he said. Treaties endure less from ignorance than from being believed. The vault shows us the edits. Belief can survive footnotes if given time. The legal counsel for the Academy cut in with a phrase donors like reputational harm. The recorder stone answered without anger. Reputation is a story you tell other people, it said. Character is the story your tools tell about you. The council asked Lysa for her account. She narrated without heroics, because heroics make bad precedents. The faulty assumption that choral equals secure, the maintenance dialect, the contractor's name on the corroded tag, the admin phrase that should have been changed a century ago, and had not. We are lucky our villains are lazy, she said, and the camera did a very small zoom as if to make a footnote out of courage. The public chat that scrolled beside the stream did the thing crowds do when offered competence without swagger. It got quiet enough to read. Then politics remembered its favorite toy. A representative from the treaty office soft suit. Eyes like a ledger requested that the mirror be limited to internal academic use, pending multinational review. He cited clauses with names that sounded like guilt disclaimers: necessary secrecy, prudent custodianship, safeguarding stability. Lysa caught Halix's eye and saw the question in it. Do we fight this now? She looked at the admin panel and asked the vault, a question systems rarely get to answer. What is the least harm? The U I did not patronize. It offered modes. One blinked like a compromise. Delayed public mirror with audit trail. Change notifications to impacted parties. Public index now. Full text on date with a redaction review that recorded names and reasons forever. Lysa turned the tablet to show the camera. We suggest this, she said. It is kind to institutions without lying to people. The Chancellor, who had in her youth once rerouted an entire endowment away from an oligarch's naming rights to fund pipes that do not burst, smiled despite politics. By the book, she said. Moved. Adopt delayed public mirror with audit. Second, Halix's voice made sound like a covenant. Seconded. The vote was not unanimous. It did not need to be. The chat students, alumni, bored citizens who had tuned in for scandal and found maintenance spooled out thank you leaf wrench memes Lysa did not understand and would later. Noon became afternoon. The mirror's index, just the titles, not the bodies, went live. On the relocation of the mourners' choir, adjustment to historical attribution, the day without the sun, protocol for witness stones in diplomatic halls. The titles alone were a stern sermon. The recorder stone asked to make a statement, and the room decided devices could have the floor. I was carved to remember when people asked me to keep them honest, it said. You forgot how to ask. The child reminded you. You now have a choice, to hear or to hello. The Chancellor bowed as if to a colleague. We choose to hear. Predictably, the first offended party called. The Ministry of Peace on a nearby world pinged the Academy with a message that managed to be polite and threatening and already regretted itself. Release of the index would complicate reconciliation and provoke interest from extremist historians. Lysa handed the call to legal, who handed it to a new committee that had learned the proper answer to threats disguised as etiquette. We are happy to schedule your panic for next week. In the meantime, please enjoy the index. Evening pooled in the vault like a new floor. Facilities ran new power, checked the old seals, replaced a gasket that had been expected to hold another decade and deserved retirement. Scylla brought Lysa a sandwich with the reverence field text, give colleagues who find a shortcut that isn't cheating. You made us visible, she said. That never pays in plaques. It pays in pipelines. Lysa ate like a person who had been a verb since dawn. Halix wrote, delays are for kindness, not for forgetting. On a note card he pinned to the glass, because sometimes you leave instructions in places where the building can see them. As the vault's lights settled into a steady day mode, a whisper ran along the inner aisle, not through speakers, but in the vibration of stone that has found its voice again. Next of kin notified, it repeated from the morning. Lysa frowned. Kin to what? The stone chuckled like water over granite and lit a shelf deeper in. On it lay a thin cylinder sealed with that particular adhesive people use when they mean to die, having done their part. The label had a date older than the Academy's charter and a name that refused to be footnoted. Halix stepped up beside Lysa and read aloud, not for the camera, but for the room. For the grandchildren of a city that forgot its river, it said. Tomorrow, Lysa told the vault, the council, the stone, and herself. We read it together. The interface flickered consent. Politics did not sleep. It rarely does. But the building, grateful to be asked for truth in its proper language, dimmed lights on schedule. Systems of a certain age appreciate a student who learns their maintenance dialect, and the feeling is mutual. The cylinder was smaller than the arguments it carried. Lysa Arantes turned it in her hands, the way people turn gifts they are afraid to deserve. The seal strip had aged into stubbornness. Facilities sent Scylla with a micro wheel cutter and the kind of smile field text reserved for screws that have sworn oaths. Do it on stream, Instructor Halix said, voice the same steady size as yesterday. The council had convened a smaller quorum in the gallery with an expression that wanted to be approval and was at least consent. Archivist Marsev had brought a cloth that he expected to wrap a relic in. Legal had brought a scanner and the understanding that popular law is made of afternoons like this. The recorder stone thrummed an octave lower, as if a river had taken off its shoes. Lysa cut the seal like a surgeon and rolled the adhesive onto itself, because mess is a kind of disrespect. Inside, a ribbon of memory literal, not metaphor-thin films of crystalline polymer etched with microglyphs that preferred darkness to drama. A vault dimmed the aisle in deference. The admin panel offered a gentle overlay, projector assistance available. Lisa threaded the ribbon through a reader, whose existence made Marsev pretend he had always known it was there. The wall lit with water maps of a watershed, rendered as if the artist loved gravity. Flow lines annotated in a script the Chancellor recognized with a start as older than the Council, but younger than the hills. Title, the U, I said, out of habit. For the grandchildren of a city that forgot its river, Lisa read, and the hall understood the stone's phrase from yesterday had not been flourish, but index. The first frame wrote a simple history. A city grown with its back to water, because engineers had put pipes in the ground and politicians had put fountains in squares. A drought, an aquifer bribed into confession, a century of treaties written to stabilize thirst by making it somebody else's problem. Then a choice, to pave over the river with a park that would forgive adults and teach children how to play near a ghost. The ribbon did not accuse. It annotated. Here a vote, here a payment, here the day the fish died, while officials prepared statements about seasonal variance. A man who had once been a child on that bank carved a recorder stone and installed it in a diplomatic hall so that when ambassadors debated which nations would be allowed to forget their rivers, the floor would hum disapproval. He had written to the future because the present had found the word humane and applied it to pipelines. Lisa looked away from the wall to the admin panel and found her hands wanting to type an apology into a field that did not accept text. The camera made the right choice and pointed at the audience. The chat slowed from opinion into reading. Alumni who had left the city decades ago typed street names like tips to ghosts. A maintenance crew in a neighboring academy posted a photo of their river, which had been turned into a canal and then into an explanation. Legal counsel spoke into her recorder for the benefit of Dawn. Exhibit A, provenance of tape. Exhibit B, continuity of recorder stone. Exhibit C, index audit. Legal question. What is the statute of limitations on forgetting a river? Marsev, who had wanted relics to be polite, stood with his hands on the rail like a sailor rediscovering land. This is not a weapon, he said, and his voice made the gallery consider not flinching. This is a course correction. The council liaison, who had signed up for diplomacy, found himself in the business of tides. Do we send this to the Ministry of Peace? He asked. Hallex answered with the confidence of a person exhausted by lying. It has already been sent. Artifacts do not stop at one truth when woken. The next strip in the ribbon was not a map, but a ledger. Names of families paid to move from the floodplain. Names of officials paid to call the floodplain a park. Names of contractors paid to remove stones that recorded stories inconvenient to cement. The recorder stone pulsed once, self-referentially. They moved me twice, it said without grievance. We kept moving back. The chat spawned a tag that would become a march. Bring back the river. Politics called in the oldest tool, delay. The Ministry of Peace proposed a commission, blue-ribboned and bipartisan, to study historic water narratives with a reporting schedule that would produce footnotes after elections. Legal looked at Hallex, who looked at Lisa, who looked at Scylla, because some questions require torque. We don't need a commission, Scylla said, not looking up from the gasket she was finally replacing, because respect for old seals can be misplaced. We need to open the weirs on schedule and stop letting fountains vote. The Chancellor, who had once rerouted an endowment to fund pipes, recognized her moment. By the book, she said into the stream. The Academy endorses immediate release of the index and ribbon to public repositories with audit trails. We will host open seminars on river governance. We will offer technical assistance to municipal crews who do not have time to write white papers. The liaison flinched at the phrase endorse. Diplomats prefer verbs that hide wills. You cannot instruct a city, he said. We can invite it, she said, and we can explain the valves. The vault offered another kindness systems. Sometimes remember when humans are being better than usual. A schematic of the old floodgates, annotated with maintenance notes, left by a person who had taken pride in making water behave. Gate 4 sticks in heat, the margin confessed. Gate 2 likes to lie closed. Lisa read the annotations aloud, like letters from a grandparent. There will be lawsuits, Legal said, neither happy nor sad, merely truthful. And scholarships, Hallex added, because universities must invent their own jokes when the budget refuses. In the late afternoon, someone tried to break the story. A prominent donor sent a message suggesting that revealing edits could invite unrest. The recorder stone, without being asked, provided a clip from a reception at which the same donor had admired the stone's texture and asked whether it might be replicated for decor. The clip did not need narration. The donor authorized his own silence by staying silent. Sunset in the vault is a trick of LEDs, but it felt like weather. The admin panel logged shifts and closed the right queue. The mirror's 6-hour delay counted down with the solemnity of a launch clock. Lysa wished, privately, that she had the power to make everyone read instead of react. She had exactly enough power to write a caption on the index page and chose 9 words. We are not deleting anyone. We are adding context. She paused, then added 2 more. Bring water. The stream remained open, because closing it would have been a decision the building would resent. Comments continued to arrive like debris, and then like offerings. An aerial photograph of a dried riverbed that had been painted green for a festival. A child's drawing of a fish with legs walking to find its water. A maintenance ticket from a City 3 jumps away asking whether anyone had a manual for a floodgate older than its permits. The vault hummed as if tuning a choir that had never learned to be in key together. Night promised escalation. The Ministry of Peace pinged again with a time-sensitive request. Delay the mirror by 30 days. The council considered the political cost of telling truth on time versus the moral cost of teaching a building to lie for convenience. Hallex looked at the recorder stone. What did your carver want? He asked. The stone, which had learned to be funny, said, hydration, then softened. To be believed before dying, it said. Lysa typed the council's answer into the admin field without needing permission and pressed enter. Because some stories have only one honest key. At the top of the hour, the mirror pushed. The index left the academy and made itself at home in a dozen public servers. The ribbon unscrolled into cities whose maps had been politely incorrect for a century. Somewhere downwell, a valve older than an election turned because a municipal worker who had stayed late decided to learn the maintenance dialect of their weir. Somewhere upwell, a donor crafted a statement that would not survive morning. In the vault, the air smelled like old water finding new air. Lysa stayed until the building suggested sleep. On her way out, she passed the admin panel and patted it the way people pat pets for a job well done. Tomorrow, she told the stone and Hallex and Marsev and the legal council and whoever was still watching. We stopped teaching the river to be ashamed. The stone, which keeps receipts and jokes, answered, bring boots. The mirror did what mirrors do when held steady. It multiplied light and made dirt visible. By dawn, 3 cities had scheduled emergency sessions with agendas that should have been routine open the weirs. Audit the pumps. Stop treating fountains as moral victories. The Ministry of Peace tried again to braid delay into dignity. The council, having chosen to hear rather than hello, replied with a calendar and a list of tools. Lysa Arantes drank her coffee in the vault because buildings develop preferences, and she liked to be the person they hoped for. Scylla from facilities arrived with boots and a grin. You asked for water, she said. We brought torque. They took the schematic the vault had gifted annotations from a dead engineer who had measured pride in valves that obey and translated its maintenance dialect to field maps. The recorder stone played ambient approval like a cat's purr in geology. Instructor Hallex kept the stream open, but moved the camera to faces instead of relics. A city clerk with pen marks on his fingers explaining a budget line for weir lubrication. A floodplain resident holding a photo of her grandmother standing in a river that had been rebranded a park. Archivist Marsev did what penitent scholars do when presented with a practical task. He moved boxes out of the way without complaining about labels. Downwell. At Gate 2, the one that liked to lie closed, a municipal crew in patched coveralls stared at a wheel that had become ceremonial from neglect and tried not to translate that too directly into politics. The vault fed their cums the notes the old engineer had left. Hit the housing with a soft mallet to loosen sleep, back off the lock nut, a quarter turn, grease until truth. On 3, the crew chief said into the stream, because everyone was listening. 1, 2, the wheel argued, and then remembered itself. Water does not require credentials to behave. It surged the way a throat does after a hard conversation. The feed caught the first muddy plumes sneaking past the gate with the relief of a confession. The chat, which had been practicing piety, lost composure and turned into a flood of fish emojis, wrench emojis, hearts doing what hearts do when given verbs. Legal counsel noted, for the record and the next court date, that the change log included names and reasons for previous closures, and that the new log would include names and reasons for opening. The counsel liaison read a prepared comment about managed flows, and then, sensing the tide of the room, tore the second half off and said instead, "We will not schedule the river for after elections." Predictably, the first lawsuit arrived dressed as Concern. A consortium of riverside property owners filed for an injunction to prevent unauthorized hydrological alterations, citing potential devaluation of river-adjacent cafes and sentimental loss of duck feeding opportunities. The judge assigned Ree Shalin, who had recently been seen refusing to box conscience, declined to halt the opening and set a hearing for next week with the note, "Bring boots." The Ministry of Peace, in a brave attempt at owning the inevitable, announced a commission on historical water narratives and appointed 2 actual hydrologists and 1 man whose primary qualification was owning a suit that looked good on streams. The chat generated a brief, mean meme. Hallex gently suggested we save our mockery for days without valves. The vault offered a new set of receipts with the patient cruelty that only systems can manage. A cluster of documents titled Emergency Diversions Festival Season, with signatures that will cause scowls at donor dinners. Lisa did not call them out. She left them in the index and wrote a short explicable, "Diversions have side effects. Bring shade to parks and water to rivers." The recorder stone, increasingly comfortable with jokes, added, "And sandwiches. People forget sandwiches." The most dangerous escalation was not legal. It was narrative. An opposition counselor found an old slogan, "Make the river great again," and printed it on shirts the color of algae bloom. The chancellor sighed, like a person who has seen slogans eat budgets, and instructed public affairs to print T-shirts that said, "Make the river hydraulically functional," which did not sell as well and delighted engineers. Silas Facilities crew took selfies at Gate 2 with shirts that only fans of viscosity would understand. By evening, a city that had paved its guilt called in a favor from law enforcement. Officers arrived at Gate 4 to ask for a pause to ensure public safety. The crew chief, whose grandmother had also stood in a river with dignity, offered them gloves. "Safety is when we do this on schedule," she said. One of the officers accepted the glove and learned that public safety is a vector that sometimes points at bolts. In the vault, Lisa felt the room exhale into the next day and the next. The admin panel logged changes with an efficiency that made her love good interfaces. The stone told a story about children catching fish by hand in a flood year, narrated without romance, because history is best served dry. Hallex wrote 2 more instructions on the glass. "Delay is for kindness," and beneath it, "Kindness has a calendar." The mirror's timer reached another hour. The next tranche of titles went out to publics, who had begun to plan Saturdays around reading receipts. Lisa shut her eyes and saw water moving through gates on purpose. She opened them because waiting was work. The vault dimmed for night. The city, grateful to remember itself, did not. By the 3rd day, opposition discovered its manners and filed for an emergency injunction with better stationery. The consortium of riverside owners retained a barrister whose voice could sand headlines, arguing that unauthorized hydrological interventions posed irreparable harm to amenities and tranquility. Ari Sholin convened at dawn in a temporary chamber overlooking Gate 2, because courts sometimes remember to put their ears where facts happen. The stream stayed live. Lisa Arantes sat with Instructor Hallex on a folding chair that had already learned ceremony. Sela from Facilities leaned on a toolbox that had never met a robe it feared. The recorder stone was present by patch, its voice carried in the feed like bedrock wit. Petitioners called an economist who quantified the value of cafe reflections and premium duck feeding vistas. Legal countered with a public health officer who quantified the cost of heat islands, dead fish, and hauling water by politics. A hydrologist from the Ministry of Peace tried to argue for managed, flow pilots, and looked relieved when the ground failed to applaud. Then Sholin did the thing good judges do. He asked the machine. "Gate 2, he said, "state your condition." The vault projected the maintenance log in plain. Non-sacred U, last full lubrication 42 years ago. Lock nut over-tightened by ceremonial crew. Obstruction mineral accretion, plus leaves. Remedy? Sholin asked. Back off quarter turn. Grease to truth, the log said. The court reporter blinked and typed grease to truth like a psalm. Lisa testified without poetry, which is how you earn it later. Choral overlay bypassed via maintenance interface. Admin credentials restored. Mirror set to delayed public with audit. Council vote recorded. River gave logs imaged. The barrister attempted character assassination by scholarship. "You are not an engineer," he said. "Neither is the person who tightened that lock nut," she replied, polite and lethal. Scylla didn't clap because she was unscrewing the past. Sholin's ruling was as long as a wrench and as short as a headline. "Injunction denied," he read. "Irreparable harm to vistas does not outweigh reparable harm to rivers. The public interest, measured in heat, oxygen, and history, favors opening the gates under professional maintenance." Audited by this court, he ordered a standing docket, weekly logs, public seminars, and a hotline where citizens could report either leaks or lies. In plain, bring boots, he said, which is a kind of jurisprudence. The consortium pivoted to stories because law had refused to. A campaign launched. Images of flooded benches labeled chaos. Interviews with cafe owners who had been told they were losing ambience. One particularly persuasive duck with bad timing. The Mirror answered not with snark, but with receipts. Festival diversions, the cost of hauling water to fountains during drought declarations. The overtime logged by crews asked to schedule water around ribbon cuttings. The recorder stone offered a fragment from before politics had discovered microphones. A grandmother teaching a child to read river levels by the color on stones. The child in the fragment grew up to be the engineer who wrote grease to truth, which is how cultures reproduce themselves when permitted. The Chancellor announced the Academy's contribution with the joy adults get when allowed to be useful. A free, open short course called River 101 History, Hydraulics, Humility Co., taught by Hallex, Scylla, and the hydrologist who had survived the ministry without becoming ornamental. "We will certify anyone who can open a gate without lying to it," Hallex said on stream, and 1,000 apprenticeships were born. Gate 4 groaned awake that afternoon, and with it, the first schools of fish brave enough to embarrass policy. Children cheered in the uncoordinated, unanimous way children possess. A cafe owner set out buckets and discovered that reflections of moving water sell better than nostalgia. The duck swam with the professionalism of a creature not consulted by campaigns. The opposition councillor reprinted his slogan on blue shirts to match the river and pretended it had always meant hydraulically functional. Engineers bought them ironically. In the vault, Lisa added a line to the index page. "Submit your gate logs here." The first upload arrived within minutes from a town 2 jumps away, and the vault's backend, now rehabilitated into a real public utility, filed it under a tag that will read like an origin story later. This is how it spreads. The recorder stone hummed approval. Next of kin notified, it said. They brought boots. Politics tried one last shape, a grand compromise, requiring the Mirror to delay 90 days for regional harmony. The council scheduled a vote with an agenda that smelled like stress and sugar. Public Affairs warned of donor discomfort. The Ministry of Peace offered a symposium and a buffet. Lisa stood by the admin panel with her palm resting on truth the way divers rest on railings. Hallex tuned the mics for sentences rather than speeches. Archivist Marsev brought the cloth again, this time to wipe dust off working tools, not to cover them. The recorder stone requested the floor. The Chancellor gave it a mic with the same formality she would extend to a head of state. Because mornings like this are how customs are born. I was carved to remember when people preferred forgetting, the stone said. You have put me back to work. Do not demote me to decor. 90 days is a polite way of saying children first, truth later. It projected, unasked, the open logs. Heat down 2 degrees along the corridor. Dissolved oxygen up. 3 crews trained. Fines paid by the tug that tried to seize conscience last story. Clothing purchases tracked by engineers against their better judgment. The hall laughed in the key of relief. The vote was not close. The mirror kept its 6-hour delay, the kindness setting rather than the 90-day amnesia. The ministry registered disappointment and sent the hydrologist anyway to teach Weirs 4. Diplomats. The consortium's barrister pivoted to advising clients on deck height and flood insurance, which is how markets learn. Sholin closed his standing docket with a note that belongs on plaques. Maintenance complete is a moving target. Keep moving. The vault returned to being a building component rather than a character, which is the highest honor a system can achieve. It kept the minutes. New gates cleaned, old grudges named. Logs uploaded from towns Lysa will never visit, but will nevertheless help maintain. Facilities installed a brass plate by the admin panel, not to perform piety, but to instruct hands. Maintenance interface use when the choir is late. Above it, someone taped a paper sign in marker that read grease to truth, and nobody removed it because doctrine has to start somewhere. The Academy's river 101 course overflowed. Cadets in politics learned torque. Cadets in engineering learned to argue in sentences. Citizens learned to read water levels instead of press releases. The Chancellor rerouted a donor dinner into a weir walk and watched a man who had funded fountains fall in love with valves. Hallex wrote, "Delay is for kindness, not for forgetting," one more time, and retired the note with ceremony into the recorder's index. Marsev drafted a revised charter for the archives that used the words public, audit, and lunch. On an ordinary morning dressed as Victory, Lysa arrived early, as is her habit, and found the vault quiet in the way kitchens are quiet before meals. She tapped the admin screen, once to check logs and once to say good morning. The panel flashed a message it had composed out of gratitude or good design. Admin acknowledged. Lisa smiled and put her hand on the metal the way people do when they own both responsibility and joy. Sila came in with a new apprentice and a bad joke about ducks. Hallex arrived with coffee and a syllabus for the week that included torque, treaties, and telling the truth before it becomes expensive. "You did it," the Chancellor said later, not ceremonially but usefully. On her way through a building that now understood its job, Lysa shook her head and looked at the chat, the logs, the boots drying by the door. "We're doing it," she corrected. The recorder's stone, with the timing of a good chorus, added, "Keep doing it."